Hey everyone, so this is a quick walkthrough of the mortgage calculator portion, and to get started, what we're going to do is take in some entry fields in a GUI and use this calculation that's provided to us to figure out what the mortgage will be for this. And you need to use the grid layout for this. You could use pack technically, but it's just too much work, and using grid is a lot better. So now if we go ahead and we run our code here, we'll notice that right away we get a TK opening of a GUI, which is straightforward enough, but this isn't enough for us to do anything with it. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and call the make widgets function right away to go ahead and call this function that's down here. So after I say self.makeWidgets, what is going to happen is it's going to run this function that's down here, and this function that's here is first of all, I'm going to give myself the mortgage calculator title like so. And then what I want to show off here is just the incremental build out of this GUI, because sometimes when you're building out these, it can get a bit convoluted with like everything going on. So now you can see on my mortgage calculator is working. And now what I need to do is figure out, okay, I need 3 entry boxes, 3 labels, and a button. So to go ahead and get started with that, what I'll do is make the labels first because they're the easiest. So I'm going to go ahead and pack labels in. And now, as a general reminder, we only use self dot something in GUI or tkinter if we need to reference the value or that field later at a date. And do we ever really need to reference these labels? Not really. So what you can do to make this a lot easier for yourself without having to deal with too many variables is you could just say label with self text is going to be equal to principal, and then what we could say here is dot pack, or sorry, dot grid, row is equal to 0, column is equal to 0. And you'll notice here another thing is that because I'm not referencing an entry or a variable of self dot, I can use my dot grid on the exact same row as well, or excuse me, the same line. So we now see that I have my principal, and what I'm going to do really quickly to make this easier on myself is I'll go ahead and copy this a few more times, and I'll change this guy to be the interest rate. I'll change the one below this to be the term in years, and of course these are going to be underneath each other, so I'm just going to change the row to increment my row to go down one by one value. And now great, look at this, we now have our principal, interest rate, and term in years, and we're kind of already halfway there of getting our items to work here. Now what we're going to go and do here is make entry boxes, and I'm going to say these need self dot because we need to reference them later. We put exclamation points so we remember. And what I'll say here is something like self.p entry, which is going to be the principal entry. I'm going to say self.p entry is equal to an entry box. And what this entry box is going to be referencing is the self. And then I'm not going to put in any text yet. Let me just put in text here. And let me try to pack this right away to row is equal to 0. Column is equal to 1. So it's going to be to the right of it. Now, if I try running my code, this does work sometimes, but you'll notice later on that you might encounter scenarios where dot grid is going to be a bit weird. So as a general reminder, if you're ever using self.p entry, what you need to do is use self.pentry.grid, because what's going to happen is that it is going to assign the value of entry self.grid to the variable p entry. So technically self.p entry isn't an entry box, it is an entry box's grid. That's what happens when you do it like this, where you put .grid after this. You're assigning the .grid, which returns a none type, to self.p entry, which is why you get those errors later on of none type and all these weird errors. So as a general rule of thumb, always, if you're making entry boxes or buttons to reference later, always do them in this format. Now to go ahead and make my other entry boxes here, I'm going to say self.i entry for interest is equal to an entry of self.pentry.grid, row is equal to 1, column is equal to 1 because it's the next one below me, and then self.t entry, which is my term entry. Ooh, this should not be p entry, that should be I entry. As you can see, I'm already I'll say I did that on purpose. And then self.t entry.grid right here is going to be equal to my row of 2 and then my column of 2. Awesome. So now I've packed all these guys into a certain grid, And it looks like it's going pretty well. This guy's jumping to the gun over there. Why is he doing that? Oh, it looks like my column was at 2 as well. And now it looks like we have these all really neat and laid out. Now, what I'm going to try to do here is my calculate payment seems to be underneath my my grids here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to say make button. What I'll do here is I'm going to say when I make this button, I'm going to say self dot button or calc button, and I'm going to set this equal to a button, and it's going to be referenced to myself. And now this is going to be referenced to a command as well. Now I want to do a little bit more after I pack this really quick. Let me just pack this super quick before we look at what's going on with this command here. And there's a few things that we need to understand happen when we run this command. So normally what we want to do is say, okay, I have a command within my object-oriented class called calculate mortgage, and I want to run it when I click this button. So buttons pretty much work when they say, okay, my command is going to be equal to self.calculate mortgage. And now let's just go ahead and see if this works for us. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to print testing for the time being, like so. Now, if I run my code here, we'll notice that I get this interesting error that says tkinter tkapp object has no attribute calculate mortgage. Did you mean calculate mortgage with the capital one? I might have actually just spelled this wrong. Let's go ahead and see this one fixes it. Okay, so that was just my fault. I went ahead and spelled it wrong. I also forgot my text error, so let me go ahead and set my text here to be calculate payment really quick. And let me full screen this so we can really see what's going on. Great, and now this looks just like the PDF, and we'll see here that when I hit calculate payment, I'm able to essentially grab in whenever I click calculate payment, it is going to be running this command that's over here. Now you'll notice that I didn't put in the parentheses beside it, and let's go ahead and try to put these in here. And you'll see here that when I put in my parentheses, it automatically runs my piece of code. So essentially what happens here, whenever I put in my parentheses at the end there, it is going to say, hey, go ahead and run. Whenever I read this line of code, it's going to jump up here and use the calculate mortgage function. So for the time being, what I'm going to say is, why don't we just leave it at self.calculate mortgage? And now an issue though is that this command of self.calculate mortgage is supposed to get the values that we enter into here, right? So what we need to do next is essentially, let's go ahead and try to get these values from here. So what I'm going to say here is I'm going to say, let's just say principal or P is equal to self.p entry. And let's go ahead and see. Yep, so we're also going to need to make sure that we do the calculating properly. We try and accept. But for the time being, let's just assume that the user knows what to enter, and then we could do the errors later. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say P is equal to P self.pentry.get. I is equal to self.ientry.get. And then T is equal to self.tentry.get. Now, if I go ahead and I hit my calculate payment again, we'll notice here that it seems to be working okay with no errors just yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print out P, I, and T, like so. Let's do 5, 12, and 5. And now we're able to get each of these values properly here. And if I put in test in here, it seems like each of these guys are working out perfectly. Cool. So now what I want to do here is after I put in each of these guys here, what I want to do is somehow manipulate them to get me the value of this calculation up here. So again, I'm not doing anything with the try and accept yet. I'm just really just trying to incrementally build up to my solution. And what I want to do is after I go ahead and I get my principal and everything, I'm going to go ahead and calculate, let's see here, the monthly payment on a mortgage. So I'll go ahead and say monthly payment, like so. And this is going to be equal to P times R. So I'm going to go ahead and make a calculation here. So P times R. Oops, actually, you know what? Instead of, let's see here. We should probably go ahead and make sure that these guys are lined up properly. So P is the principal n is equal to the term of the loan. So let's see here. Term in years was my this guy down here. So let me actually make a few comments so that we don't get confused later on here. Again, apologies for this. Should have done this earlier, but I'll just do it now. So this is going to be principal. And then my I entry, which is my interest rate, that is term of loan, that is the R. So R in formula. And then this one is going to be the N in formula. Cool. And you know what? To make it really easy on us, I'm just going to call this the R entry instead of the I one really quick, just so that it's easier to calculate it up here. So I'm going to say R and then N. So P, R, and N. We do it one more time right here. And let's just make sure that everything's working. Great. Okay, no errors just yet. Now I'm going to say monthly payment is going to be equal to, and what is going to be equal to, or M, as it says there, is going to be equal to P times R, that value divided by 1200.0. And now this entire thing is going to be divided by the calculation of 1 minus 1.0 plus R, plus the calculation of R divided by 1200, excuse me, 0.0. And then that entire calculation, or sorry, 1 minus this calculation, that is then squared, let me just make sure it's right, squared to negative 12 times n. So what this means is I'm going to increase it to negative 12.0, or to the exponent of negative 12.0 times n, and then that entire thing is going to be calculated together. So it's a pretty hefty calculation, but again, it's just mimicking this concept here. Where you might find errors here is like if you misplace a parenthesis. This definitely takes some time to get used to, but again, this is just a general way that you could approach this. And let's go ahead and try to print out this monthly payment here. And there is a calculation tester here as well. And let's see here, this one says 536.82 with these values put in. So let me go ahead and run this guy. And what does he put in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 and then 30. And then, we're getting this error where we say can't multiply sequence by non-int of type string. And why that's happening is essentially because we have all these gets, but they're not converted yet. So what we need to do here is go ahead and double check what it was saying to us. So P is going to be a decimal, which in Python terms is a float. N is going to be an integer, which in Python terms is still an int. And then R is going to be a decimal as well, which again in Python terms is a float. A float and decimal are interchangeable. And now we could say 10,000. Let's see here. And then 5 and then 30. And it looks like, oops, I need one more zero. Cool. So I'm getting 536.82 and everything. And I can round that to whatever place I'd like to. And now what I can say here is I finally figured out that my input is working here. So now what we need to do here is after we go ahead and we calculate this payment, we're going to go ahead and use a show info box. And the title is going to be equal to the monthly payment. Like so. And then we are going to go ahead and say the message is equal to your monthly payment is, and then it's going to be equal to this $sign. And I need to go ahead and I need to calculate this to be a certain decimal place. So I'm going to say here is a %2f, and if this doesn't work, I was just doing Java, so we could double check if this one is going to work. But this will be a format, and what I'm going to format this as is monthly payments. And then this is going to be a show info that runs after we type it in. See that there? Show info. Oops, I believe it's a show message box. Isn't it? Let me go ahead and grab my import statement. I believe we're missing one more import statement here. Just give me 1 second. Where was it? See here. There we go. That was the one I was missing. Sorry about that. Tkinter message box show info. So I was right with the show info. Let's see here. There we go. Now let's go ahead and try to calculate this guy. Cool. And we'll notice now that I'm getting this error with 2F. Essentially, for the time being, let's leave out the formatting here. We could fix that up in a moment. And it looks like I'm getting the monthly payment. Your monthly payment is this large decimal here. Awesome. So if we continue where we're going here, it looks like everything is going okay. We're getting our outputs here. But what might happen is the scenario where we are encountering a few different issues within our code here. One of them might be, if we take a look at the PDF as well, is the issue here where we get the error incorrect value for principal entered and incorrect value for interest. So not only are we supposed to give a general error, we are also supposed to individualize them. So essentially, each of these guys need to go ahead and make sure that we are putting them in properly. And one way that you could do that, and it might be a little confusing, you might try some if statements, and there's a few different ways you could go about it, but the easiest way is to essentially put in a few try and excepts for each of these individual ones. So try making P a float from the entry box, except, and I'm just going to go ahead and very simply P error, like so. And then let's go ahead and try these for each of these. So if I try to go ahead and let's just say, okay, try to set R to be the float of whatever is inputted, except print R error. Now, if we go ahead and try to run this, our code should run just fine. And let's see if I put in a bunch of gibberish here, we'll see now I get the P error. Now, again, if this is all working out okay, what we'll need to do essentially is go ahead, and if any of these guys run, you'll notice that I get this error that my accept will break back into the clause. What I'll need to do here is essentially return or break out of my statement a bit earlier. But before we do that, let's go ahead and try to do this for our n as well. So try n is equal to int self get and accept. I'm going to print an n error like so. And now if we run all of our code here, regular numbers fix it, and now you'll see I get a R error, I'll get an R and an N error, and then I'll get, let's go ahead and put it at G, I'll get all of them errors. Now we're getting this other issue where our code is still running before this finishes up, and let's try to put in our accepts here a return statement. And if I go ahead and I try to type in R now here, you'll notice that when I get a P error, it's actually going to just return out of my code and break my code essentially. Or excuse me, break out of this calculate mortgage. And this code down here will never run. So essentially what we need to do here is go ahead and put in, instead of these print statements, this show info statement. So this show info statement is essentially going to say monthly payment and then error incorrect value entered for each of these. And so how about for this one here, I'll say incorrect value entered for, and what was our n was our term. Do it like this. And again, if your format was slightly different, it's not a huge deal. Again, that's just a general idea of how to run them. And now we have our incorrect value entered for rates, and for our last one, incorrect value entered for principal. And again, what will happen here if we don't put these return statements after these show infos is that our code will still break out and run, and we'll get an error here because we're trying to calculate with values that aren't set. So now we can calculate these values here, and if I put in words here, incorrect value entered for principal, incorrect value entered for rate, and then this one works. And now you might be noticing I'm getting a bunch of feedback decimals, and the way that you do that is by using dot format. I'm going to put in a colon, a dot, and what this will say is, hey, format the item that is put in here, which should be a float essentially, as 2 floating places. 2f essentially will say, put me to 2 decimal places. And if we go ahead and try to calculate the 10,000, 55 and 5, we'll notice that I get it to 53. And again, if you want more decimal places, maybe you want 3 decimal places, you'll see now that this is working with 0.521, so 2.521. So again, for the homework here, it will be 2F, but that is just another way to do it. Awesome. So all of our errors will be caught after we do this. And again, this is just one attempt to go ahead and make this using the grid and the self.parameters there. Again, this is one approach to doing the try and except clauses, multiple ones. You can do them all at once. You can do some if statements as well. You can check the types of each of them. But again, this is just one way to go ahead and do that. So I hope this helps out a bit with reviewing for the midterm. And I hope please practice this one again. Try to delete everything and see if you can do it from scratch. And once you really get these concepts down, you'll be in great shape for the midterm.